This is how you build a lasting wardrobe that you're not gonna have to replace every 2 years. Now, the word timeless gets thrown around a lot in fashion, but I find that it's mostly a marketing term and not even real. Let me prove it to you. Let's look at men's suits, the thing that's supposed to be the most timeless in all of fashion. Okay, if you look at the mid 20th century, men's suit jackets used to come down all the way onto the thighs. Then you look at the 1980s, the suits became shoulder padded and big and powerful and double breasted, and it was all about having this big boxy superhero silhouette. Then you look at the early 2000s and designers like Hedi Slimane made their mark, making suiting very skinny. And then Thom Browne came in and made the suit jacket even shorter, like above the butt. And now you look at modern suits and it's kind of this take on baggy clothing but suited up, and people are starting to wear wider ties again and tuck their ties into their pants. So you can see even something supposedly as classic and timeless as a suit is subject to trend cycles. So given that fashion is this constant churn of trends, how can you find something lasting in the middle of all of that? Well, I believe you can find things that at least last you 5 to 10 years by leaning on certain principles. So these are 6 ways to get a more timeless wardrobe. Number 1 is minimalism. This is probably best exemplified by people like Daniel Simmons, people who just wear these clothes that are all about the materials, all about the quality, and all about the fit. There's not a whole lot of logos. The fit of the clothing is generally decided by what's flattering to the natural human proportions, meaning that the clothes are not going to be too skinny or too baggy. They just kind of run this nice middle ground that hovers above the shape of the human body. Also, with minimalism, you're dealing with such basic concepts like the fact that black is always going to look good with medium gray, white is always going to look good with navy, a camel coat is always going to look good contrasted with some form of blue. And just in general, when there's fewer colors, fewer embellishments, and fewer bells and whistles on the outfit, there's fewer things that can be subject to trends. So for example, a black merino wool crew neck sweater, that's not going to cycle in and out of trend too often. That's a very minimal item that is just designed to make the human face and the human body look good. The obvious downside to minimalism is that it can get a little bit boring. If you're somebody who craves variety, this is not the approach for you, and you will feel like you're stuck in Groundhog Day. But I've actually found that throughout the history of the arts, a lot of artists prefer minimalism. Even if their artwork itself is very eccentric and colorful, they like the minimalistic approach because they can just kind of throw on an outfit in the morning and know it's going to work, and it's one less thing to think about. So some people really enjoy the kind of uniform dressing aspect of minimalism. The number 2 way to be a little more timeless is to dress more monochromatically. We see this most commonly with the color black. It's fashion's eternal favorite color. Designers like Ann Demeulemeester, Yohji Yamamoto, Rick Owens lean heavily into black because it just synthesizes so well with other black pieces, obviously. But you also see this in the heritage wear communities with guys who like to wear denim head to toe, for example. Or maybe like a navy sweater with some light faded blue jeans. And there's the earth tone warriors who like to wear varying shades of brown or green or khaki. In general, if it works in the army, it usually works in fashion. Fashion takes a lot of cues from the army. So again, related to minimalism, this can be a kind of uniform dressing. And again, the downside is that it might lack some variety. But if you look at the high fashion people who wear a lot of black, you'll find that they find ways around this, namely texture. They'll wear leather with denim or silk, and they'll also play around a lot with silhouette. If you look at Yohji Yamamoto and that kind of mode fashion in Japan, there's tons of layering. There is a lot of disregard for the natural proportions of the human body and instead creating your own proportions, and a lot of experimentation with that. And Comme des Garçons and Rei Kawakubo, that whole sector of fashion is all about playing around with interesting silhouettes and using black to kind of ground it. So unlike in minimalism, monochrome does not have to be very simple and samey. The third option for dressing a little more timelessly is the one that most people think of when they think of timeless, which is 20th century classic. That's what I'll call this. And specifically, it's 20th century classic in the Western world. This would be your Oxford shirts, your polo shirts, your khakis, your rep ties, your denim jackets, basically the classic silhouette of a collared shirt, something like a leather shoe like a loafer or an Oxford or a brogue, some kind of slim to relaxed pant, and classic accessories like round tortoiseshell frame glasses. This would be brands like Brooks Brothers or Ralph Lauren or Gant or Filson. It would include anything from America or overseas that you could call heritage or Americana, or, you know, classic British tailoring, or even Italian suiting. All these things kind of fit under the same umbrella of the classic 20th century menswear adjacent type person. And the reason I specify that it's the Western world is because people do try dressing like this along the equator, you know, in the Philippines, in Latin America, in India, but you're gonna be very hot, okay? Yes, you can wear fabrics like seersucker or linen, but pre and post-colonialism, these countries have their own tradition of garb, and it's usually looser and lighter and different than what we expect from 20th century Western. So that brings me to the number 4 way to dress more timelessly, which is traditional cultural clothing. And this applies to everywhere on Earth, not just places along the equator or places that were colonized, but even European countries have their own traditional garb. If you go to Norway, they're gonna have their traditional garb. If you go to Japan, they will have traditional garb. India, the same is true of every culture on Earth. And a lot of these have been kind of subsumed and forgotten by modern dressing, which we would call classic dressing. And I think it's actually very cool to get back into traditional clothing and to learn about your own culture and even other people's culture. And if you look at traditional clothing, there tends to be a lot more embroidery, pattern, color, and not to mention just the feeling that you are connecting with your history. These clothing traditions took centuries and centuries to develop, so you might as well look into that rich, deep history instead of just buying the modern versions that some of these design houses will poach from the culture. Number 5 is probably my personal favorite way to dress a little more timelessly, and that is to wear utility clothing. If you look into your fashion history, you'll be surprised at how much of what we wear came from military and workwear use. Like this denim jacket that I'm wearing was originally created for hard manual labor, and now I am making YouTube videos in it. Clothes are meant to be lived in, so the reason I like workwear and military-inspired stuff, functional utilitarian clothing, is that there is room to move, and it tends to be durable, and it tends to last, and it tends to be very like outside of the cycles of fashion. A relaxed fit pair of raw blue denim, for example, will always be practical because it gives your leg enough space to move. It's not super baggy, it's not super skinny. It might not be the trendiest thing on the market, but it's always going to be relevant to wear because it fits the body and it allows your body to move. So within this category, obviously you have everything from like French chore coats to Levi's denim trucker jackets to Carhartt Detroit jackets to Dickies mechanic jackets, Carhartt duck canvas pants. The list goes on. And while fashion houses try to duplicate these items, I just genuinely find that going back to the source is always the best way to get them. And if you want them to look a little more fashion-y, you can always buy them vintage, so they've already been a little bit worn and faded. And to me, that is the coolest way to wear workwear. My 6th and final way to make your clothes last longer is to get involved with a subculture. I don't care if that is goth, I don't care if it's indie rock, I don't care if it's rockabilly. All these subcultures have their own dress codes, and even though you would think because it's young people and tends to be trendier people, you would think that it just goes through the trend cycle even faster. These subcultures are actually something richer than just fashion trends. They are cultures. So yes, these subcultures might get added to, like, you know, you have romantic goth, and then out of goth you start to get things like cyber goth and mall goth. But despite those different branching offs, you can still dress like a romantic goth, and that will be relevant and cool and respected within that subculture. To my knowledge, Japan seems to be the modern leader of robust subcultures and their fashion, whether we're talking about like Lolita or Decora or Visual Kei, and there's so many more. But the point is, if you're a rockabilly dude, that might have its roots in the 1950s, but it's always gonna be something cool and alternative and freaky that you can do, and I think that people will appreciate and that you'll have a lot of fun doing. So as we've learned, the only constant is change. You're never gonna have one style that literally never goes out of style, but I think these are 6 solid ways to guarantee that you will not have to always be shopping, and you can find maybe some deeper fulfillment and attachment to your own style and kind of escape the trend vortex a little bit. Let me know in the comments what other kind of content you'd like to see, and I will be back next week.